I do want to talk a little bit about these blowouts that we saw, because there has definitely been an overall narrative about them and expectations, or how much you should hold responsible the selection committee for the fact that we didn't have very competitive games. So the average margin of defeat was 19.2 points. I would like to say, for reference, this does happen in college football. The average margin of games in the CFP era was something around this as well. It's part of the reason that people wanted to expand it. I mean, we didn't have that many close games, especially in the semifinal round in the 4-team era. And for a reference point, the 2023 NFL wildcard weekend average margin of victory was 17.3 points. So we do get blowouts in sports, and we do get blowouts in college football. But why did everyone react the way that they did?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing. First off, I understand throwing the NFL wild card thing in. I saw it floating around social media. I don't want my sport to be anything like the NFL, so I'm not.
I know, but it's just the point that, like,
I get what
round,
you're saying.
Yeah,
right, and that's a league known for parity too, right? And so I do think it serves a purpose to talk about. Well, sometimes teams just have a bad day, and one team plays a great game. I understand that completely. I guess my issue is this idea of, like, we had seen snoozers in the, first iteration of the college football playoff. And we're like, oh, we'll just add more teams and the games will get better. And I'm like, I don't know if that's exactly the way that it works. But in particular with this format, which we'll address, it wasn't set up to have like a bunch of evenly matched games in the first round because of how the teams ended up being seeded. So that was ultimately a flaw. And then, as you mentioned, with a couple of these matchups coming up, we've got two that I think are going to be really good games. We saw the first one, Ohio State and Oregon at Autzen, ended up being a really good game. I think we'll get more of that. And Georgia and Notre Dame, I feel like, can be a very good one. You've also got two, due to the format, that might not be great games. That's a problem to have in the second round here. People were upset, and I think all of the anger is misdirected. We had folks that were mad about which teams were selected. And I'm very much of the thought process after watching these games that maybe Alabama does play better than Indiana and SMU. Like, maybe they do. Maybe Ole Miss does as well, and maybe South Carolina does. But you lost too many damn games for me to feel bad. You did not deserve to be in that field. But there is a flip side of maybe Indiana wasn't actually good enough. Maybe SMU wasn't actually good enough to be in the field. And so this ain't really a selection problem to me. Like, it might be the fact that this is a bloated playoff, and in a sport where, even in a year where we've probably seen the most parity, it's still not very even. These are some of the likely outcomes that you might see in the first round games. You get a team like Ohio State, and the only reason they're seated where they're at is because they absolutely crapped the bed against a team that they should have beat by 20 points. Yet, like, they might turn it on and end up, boat racing a team like Tennessee that I do think is good. The sport is weird. And I feel like a 12-team bracket is going to be a difficult thing in many years.
I'm just going to say it. I think it worked. I mean, the lower seeded teams lost. 9 through 12 lost. So, I mean, I'd still rather them end their season by losing on the field.
But they sold me on upsets, and they sold me on great games, Nicole.
I want great games too. I totally do. But I would have loved to see one of those upsets, right? Just to see it happen. But the 4 teams that hosted games certainly benefited from home advantage, like 100%. We're playing on campus. You felt it. You heard it. We saw so many SMU penalties when they were facing the Penn State student section. You heard all of those SEC mock chants at the shoe from Ohio State fans. So that is not going to decide these games, but it definitely was a factor. It helped the higher ranked team. But my point is, I still feel better that Indiana didn't get told by a bunch of people in a boardroom, you're not good enough to play for this. And then, we have to sit through some meaningless bowl game that they're in that they don't really care about. So if they lose and they, are not good enough to play for a national championship, well, that was determined on the field. So I'm okay with that. I get what you're saying. I would love to see more competitive games, but I think it's the overall point that the cutoff line of actual national championship caliber teams this season was the 8 seed. Because Ohio State certainly is good enough to win a national championship at its high end. And we saw that, and that played itself out. And again, there's some seeding issues with Boise State and Arizona State that maybe they're not that category. We don't know yet. We haven't seen them play yet against these types of teams. But I think it's okay that the cut line was where it was, because we're not going to go back down to an 18 playoff. And if you had an 18 playoff, the way that it's set up, that would have been set up with 5 conference champions, Ohio State's not in it, by the way. They're the 4th highest at-large team. So I get that the games were not competitive. I wish that they were. That is a seeding problem. That is not, I don't think, the size of the bracket. But we also have to remember, Joshua, the way that they set this whole thing up and the reason they did it in the first place was not because a team that was good enough to win a national championship was being left out. Like going from 2 to 4, that was, I think, the main goal, right? Your team, the first year of the playoff, proved that if you had the BCS system, the best team in the country might not have been playing for a national championship. The reasons they expanded this were, engagement throughout the season, access for more teams. It wasn't necessarily saying like, oh, the 10th seed is going to win a national championship, is going to get through 4 games to win it. I know that that's not, again, maybe that's not like a great thing. And I think a lot of people will disagree, and they want the best teams, and they want 12 teams that they think can win it all and can get through 3 or 4 games. But that's not why this thing was expanded. So the deserved and the reasons that people were selected was still adhering to the principles about why they did this in the first place.
It's really hard for me to feel good about a collective group of people who said that the best way for us to crown a champion, which is the most important thing in our sport, is to think about engagement during the regular season, right? Like that is stupid to me.
Well, they wanted more teams to stay alive, to be engaged in the season.
I understand that, but like I watched Ohio State and Tennessee play last night, for example. Tennessee players going down left and right. And let's say that game was close and Tennessee ends up winning that. And they were a team where you're like, okay, could they make a run? Well, the idea that you're making them play all these games because you wanted more engagement in the regular season, now they got guys hurt, is stupid. Like it just, I'm really struggling to see how this is the best way to determine the champion of college football. And I like I said, I love games that matter. I like the idea of having these big time campus atmospheres. I love what they're doing with the second round and the bowl sites and everything. Like there are a lot of things I do appreciate about this. And I'm not trying to say like this is going to turn me off from college football. That would be stupid too. But the idea that it's like, okay, we're trying to crown a champion and this is our best approach. Like that, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
A lot of things in the way that college football works don't make a lot of sense. Like
no, they don't.
This is a compromise. This took all of these commissioners and all these different conferences with different competing interests to come up with the model the way that it is. And it doesn't work the way that it's set up because you have mega conferences and you have imbalanced schedules within them. So that's part of the reason that, Indiana goes to 11-1. And of course, an 11-1 Big Ten team is going to get in, but they didn't play the schedule that Ohio State did. Again, Indiana deserved to be there. SMU deserved to be there. You are in the bracket based on what you did prior to Selection Sunday. What happens afterwards might make you feel better about picking someone or feel worse about picking someone to be in the bracket, but it doesn't mean that they didn't deserve to be in there. But the thing is, the issue is the seeding. So because seeds 3 and 4 are not third and fourth best teams in the bracket, it messed up the first round games and it messes up Oregon's path as a number 1 overall seed. We talked about it. They have a hard path. They have to go through what Ohio State is now the second highest odds to win the national championship, and Texas is the highest. Then it's Oregon. So they have to go through potentially Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia or Notre Dame to win a national championship. And I get it. It's supposed to be hard. You are supposed to beat good teams to do this.
Sure.
But you're the number 1 overall seed. And Penn State right now, they blew out SMU, and now they just have Boise State standing in the way of a semifinal appearance. That's not the loser of the Big Ten championship game. Like, people are going to say that they could cakewalk into the semifinals, and Oregon has to go through Ohio State to get there. Like, that part seems unfair.
No, it's terrible. Like it's again, like you said, you got to beat good teams. I don't feel good about it though. Like it is a really difficult spot to be in, and like I know Oregon's going to be up to the challenge. You and I are familiar with Dan Lanning and how he loves to run that program. People have seen kind of the way that he motivates, but that is not a reward for how they played this season. And they were the only team that was able to make it there unscathed, right? Like It's definitely difficult. I want to push back though on this idea that like seeding is the reason, like it's part of the reason that these games were bad, I think, in the first round.
Let me tell you what they would have been. Can we go through what they would have been? Okay. So if you had done, now there's a couple different ways to fix this, right? People have talked about reseeding, which would have worked, right? Because then Oregon would be playing Arizona State in the quarters, which feels fair, right?
Sure.
Fair reward. But if you did it in the first place, so you say, hey, the 5 conference champions get in, but then we just rank them 1 through 12. This is what the games would have been. And there could still have been blowouts. So I agree with you. This would not have solved all the problems. But the 5-12 game would have been Notre Dame, Clemson. 6-11 game is Ohio State, Arizona State. Tennessee is the 7-10 game, Tennessee hosting SMU. And then Indiana hosting Boise State in the 8-9 game. So in this scenario, Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Penn State get the byes as the 4 highest ranked teams by the committee. So listen, Notre Dame could blow out Clemson, or maybe it would be more interesting because Clemson's quarterback and the offense could be really good.
No doubt.
But Notre Dame would probably run through them the way that we saw Texas do it.
Yes.
Ohio State could crush Arizona State, but it's interesting because Arizona State's hot coming into the matchup.
No doubt.
Tennessee, SMU, and Indiana, Boise State, I think could be really good games.
I wouldn't disagree with that either.
So I think I agree with you that like it doesn't solve everything, but doesn't that feel like a more fair bracket?
Yes, 100%. I think I agree with that. Like if you would just done 1 through 12, which we had talked about, it would be a more fair bracket. I'm also kind of on the like, just take the top 8. Just take the top 8. But they're never going back to that. I'm just going to have to get used to this world of the postseason being set up in a way that I just don't think makes a ton of sense, and just hope that we can get great performances from the teams that are in there so I don't feel as bad about it.
Do you think that the selection committee is responsible for if the games are good or not?
No, the selection committee has parameters that they have to operate within, and they have a job to do. And it's to pick the 12 teams that go in there within the parameters. And I'll address this because there was a bunch of Alabama fans that were mad. And like I said, I don't think your team deserved to be in there. But if they were going 1 through 12, Alabama would have been in there, right? So like this isn't a get mad at the committee issue. This is a structure of the college football playoff. I can't say I have too many issues about what they did. Like if they believe that those were the teams ranked in the place where they really saw them, and then they had to seed them based off of what the parameters are, I don't know what more you want out of the committee. I think they did what they had to do.